My name is Kelly Ward, and I'm with George Shackelford at the Kimbell Art Museum, and we're going to discuss the exhibition, Dutch Art in a Global Age, Masterpieces from the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston. George, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Kelly.
So tell me a little bit about, in working with the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston, how did this exhibition come together?
Well, the possibility for this exhibition comes with the amazing promise gift, loan, etc. of literally hundreds of amazing Dutch works of art from the collections of Rosemarie and Ike van Otterlo and Susan and Matthew Weatherby, who in 2017 announced their intention to give their collections to the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, virtually doubling the size of the Dutch holdings of that museum. And that's really what makes it possible for the MFA Boston, one of the great museums in America, to send a show like this out on the road and still have fantastic Dutch works of art in their galleries at home. They were kind enough to offer the exhibition to us, and we were delighted to participate in its national tour.
We often hear about Dutch Golden Age, right? So tell me about this play on words with Global Age that we have in this title.
You know, I think in the last several years, we have rightly become a little bit skeptical of the term Golden Age, because golden for who, is really the question. And what we can be sure about is that the 17th century in the Netherlands was a great global age. It was the time when, with the invention of two corporations, the Dutch East India Company and the Dutch West India Company, you suddenly had these trading corporations that changed the way the world operated. Suddenly Dutch ships were leaving ports in this tiny country in the north of Europe, and were going literally all over the globe. Around the bottom of Africa, into China, Japan, India, Indonesia, etc. So the Eastern world, and then going to Africa, across the Atlantic, and then back from the so-called New World, back from North and South America, back to Europe. And suddenly the world was one place in terms of trade. And it has been that way ever since, but it was really a new thing in 17th century Holland.
This exhibition includes many decorative arts, including silver and ceramics, some from around the world that you're talking about.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about the influence in that Dutch region of that.
Well, one of the major things that the Dutch traded in terms of durable goods, let's say, were porcelains. And the Chinese and the Japanese had discovered how to make durable and gorgeous ceramics in porcelain, high-fired porcelain, not just regular old clay, but this incredibly durable, beautiful, bright white, often decorated in blue porcelain. And Dutch ships went out to Asia and would come back laden with, tons of porcelains that had been made in China for export to Europe. It was, of course, a huge market for the Chinese, but also an incredible source of wealth for the traders in the Netherlands, who would bring this material back to Europe, and then it would go from Holland into France or England or Germany. It could be traded around Europe, and for that matter, even to the New World. That was one of the sort of durable goods, shall I say, that you got from Asia. At the same time, they were getting metals and minerals from South America, for instance. Lots of silver, lots of gold, lots of precious minerals that were coming from South American mines and finding their way into Europe through Dutch trade. So they really revolutionized the internationalism of objects in the 17th century. Suddenly there are things that you can get in Europe that you couldn't get before.
We see many portraits in this exhibition. definitely from the monumental painters of Frans Hals and Rembrandt. Tell me a little bit about the sitters in these portraits of maybe the art patronage of the time.
Well, we're lucky in this exhibition to know some of the names and some of the identities of the people who we show on our walls. Sometimes we just have no idea who they are. The name hasn't followed the picture. But in the case of this wonderful painting that we're sitting next to, for instance, by Frans Hals, we know that the woman is called Cunera van Bouwstorp. And she and her husband were painted by Hals. And here in this exhibition, we only have the lady. The man is in another museum altogether. But it's an amazing statement of power by Hals on behalf of this woman who I really wish I could have met her. She's clearly got a lot of personality. I mean, I think, Kelly, one of the things that is most remarkable and our viewers may not recognize immediately is that it was really brazen to pose with your hand on the hip like that. To pose like that if you were a woman, this is the only time we know a woman to pose for Frans Hals in this position. Usually the ladies are holding their hands in front of them maybe with some gloves in between their folded hands, or you might not see their hands at all. But here that she puts her fist on her hip and sticks her elbow out into our space is just so brazen and fantastic. She must have had an amazing personality. And so we're lucky in this exhibition to have a number of occasions where we actually know who the person was. Sometimes we just have to guess what kind of person they were, maybe even by the setting in which they're depicted. There's a wonderful portrait by Egon van der Neer that you may be able to show your readers, where a man and his wife are seated at a table covered with a Turkish carpet. They've got Spanish wall hangings on the walls, leather stamped in gilded leather. They've got a black and white pavement on the floor. They are really showing off how rich they are. And we don't know their names. And we may never know who they are exactly, but we get a lot of information about them simply by the way they're dressed and what they surround themselves with.
I'm happy to see works by two female artists in this exhibition.
Absolutely.
There's some prints by Gertrude Rugeben, and then of course the beautiful self-portrait by Maria Schlagmann. Tell me about how they made names for themselves.
You know, Maria Schlagmann was an artist that we know just a handful of works by. Her brother was also an artist. And for many years, the painting that is here by her, by Maria, was thought to be by Gottfried, the brother. And it was in the restoration of this work of art that some dirt was removed that revealed almost invisible, it's so faintly painted, her name and her signature at the top left-hand corner of the painting. And so suddenly we realized that this is not a portrait of Maria by her brother Gottfried. This is a self-portrait. And so it really changes the way we look at it. You know, that here is a woman showing herself, showing you, this, by the way, Kelly, is what I, Maria, look like. And here I am, and I'm proud of my accomplishment, being able to paint this beautiful landscape painting that you see on my easel. And I'm going to put my name at the top left-hand side of the painting. I will wager you, and our viewers will have to test in future whether this comes to pass, that there are other paintings out there that we now think to be by Gottfried that may turn out to be by Maria. And it's going to be for artists, art historians, conservators to go looking for those signatures to see if we can't reattribute some of those paintings to this woman whose talent we are only at the beginnings of appreciating.
In relation to these well-known Dutch painters, they have quite the training, I believe, right? They know how to execute this incredible drapery, these anatomy within the aged faces. Tell me about their training.
Well, you know, often these artists trained with other artists. So Maria will have trained with her brother, and Gerrit Douw, who's one of the most important pupils of Rembrandt, trains with Rembrandt, and then he goes on to train other artists in his succession. So apprenticing was the best way in the 17th century of learning how to be an artist. Occasionally, you might have had artists who studied in a kind of academy, but that's rarer in the Netherlands than it is, say, in Italy or France. And in fact, it's really the training of artists by artists that is how the traditions are passed on. And you'll find that there are talents that show themselves up immediately, as you know, Douw, Gerrit Douw, Gerritdou, one of those names that's kind of hard to pronounce for us Americans.
Yeah, we think Gerrit Douw,
Gerrit
right?
Douw, exactly. But Gerrit Douw is revealed very early on to be a really precocious talent, and particularly for extremely refined painting. And he's painting like Rembrandt is painting when he's Rembrandt's student. Rembrandt then goes on to become one of the boldest, broadest painters in the history of art, but Douw sticks with that tradition of fine painting and paints his self-portrait, the Kimbell's dentist painting, which is just fantastic picture of a man having his teeth pulled by candlelight, and one of the most darling paintings in this whole exhibition, The Sleeping Dog, which I think will be an absolute crowd pleaser and favorite for our family visitors. I think it's one of the most, it's one of the paintings that I'd like to keep behind when this show goes back to Boston.
It's so cute how it's just tiny. You're in that intimate space with the dog.
And you know, it's interesting, the painting is itself little. I mean, it's really small, smaller than a piece of typing paper. You know, about as big as a greeting card almost, let's say. And the dog is so beautifully painted with, you know, a brush with one hair, you think. And you get the impression that this is a little dog that's a puppy. And you look carefully and you realize that over at the right-hand side, there is a wooden shoe. And that shoe, assuming that it fits a grown-up foot, tells us that the dog is not a little bitty dog, it's a regular sized mutt. And but it's just so, it's the scale of the painting and the preciousness of the way it's painted leads us to have this, I don't know, a wonderful warm-hearted feeling for this animal. I just love him.
It's certainly a heartfelt work. In Franz Post's landscape in the ruins of Olinda, we see these three black figures in the foreground, also these ruins amongst them in the landscape. Tell me a little bit about these figures, their importance in all of this, you know, 17th century art, Dutch Brazil a little bit.
The Franz Post painting is a real indicator of one of the sort of underlying themes of this exhibition, because the Dutch went to Brazil for sugar and other agricultural commodities like tobacco, for instance. But sugar was one of the main things that they could get in South America that you couldn't get in Europe. The fact that the Dutch went to the edges of Brazil to establish plantations for sugar so that they could bring sugar back to Europe. But the story is very, very complicated, because they first went to Africa and loaded onto their ships captive, enslaved men, women, and children from Africa, who they took to South America to work on these sugar plantations, which is, of course, how they made a great profit, was by having the labor be unpaid. And it meant that the sugar, you can't say it was pure profit, but it was an enormously profitable commodity for them then once they got it back to Europe. Now, Franz Post was taken out to the New World, out to Brazil, to paint landscapes of what this countryside looked like for people living back in the Netherlands who wanted to see what Brazil was like. He almost never showed what life was like for these people in Brazil. He showed what the countryside looked like. But in this painting, there is a very charming grouping of people of African descent dressed in rather elegant clothing at the center of the composition. There's another grouping of people that we believe to be indigenous peoples of Brazil, dressed somewhat differently in the slightly further back in the picture. And he's showing these two groups of people, people of African heritage, people of indigenous heritage, in the context of a plantation that is entirely European in its manufacturing. And it's a picture of life there that's not particularly true to life, but it's what the people back in Holland wanted to see. And that's why the painting was made.
Of some of the decorative arts and the silver objects, I find the Torah finials incredibly interesting.
Those are, Kelly, some of the most remarkable objects in this exhibition. And a little bit of a backstory. When this show was proposed to us by our colleagues and our friends at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, I was thinking about ways in which we could personalize this exhibition for Fort Worth and for the Kimbell. And our painting by Rembrandt, certainly the giant artist in this exhibition, our painting is a study he made of the head of a Jewish man from the neighborhood in which he lived in Amsterdam. When he moved from Leiden to Amsterdam, he moved into a part of town that had been largely settled by Jewish immigrants who were coming into Amsterdam from Spain and Portugal because the Netherlands had religious freedom and they could practice their religion safely in the Netherlands in ways that they couldn't in Spain. Part of the reason why Rembrandt paints this man is that he wants to study what would the face of Christ be like. So he looks to the Jewish people around him seeking out what he thought would be the authentic face of Jesus. Then at the same time, he is patronized by these wealthy Jewish traders. They hire him to paint their portraits. They hire him to depict them in prints. They hire him to illustrate volumes for them. And so he becomes part of this very diverse society in Amsterdam that is unlike any place else in Europe at the time. And one of the things that it guaranteed was religious freedom. And the Torah finials, took a long way to get back to those, but the Torah finials are emblematic of the possibility for celebrating and doing honor to your own faith in the 17th century in the Netherlands. These Torah finials were meant to decorate either end of the Torah scroll. The scroll, the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible, written by hand on a scroll, wound around 2 rods at either end. And the rods would then be decorated with these beautiful silver crowns. They really do look like a kind of a combination of a crown and a tower. And they're made for a ceremonial occasion where the Torah would be taken away from the Torah Ark, decorated with these finials, and become part of the ceremony within the synagogue. We believe this pair of finials was made for a synagogue in Rotterdam. We know them to have been made in 1649, and there was a newly formed synagogue there in 1647. And so we think that these were probably made for that. Now that they survive is also miraculous. And it's only because they were transported from the Netherlands to England at some point before the beginning of the 20th century that means that they were not destroyed by the Nazis during the German occupation of the Netherlands during the Second World War. So many, many such items of religious significance belonging to synagogues and to individual Jewish people in the Netherlands were destroyed by the Nazis. And these finials are an incredible survival of something that that was able to be protected because it was out of the country.
Thank you again so much, George, for spending time with us today.
Thank you, Kelly, for having come to see this exhibition, and I hope your viewers will come and enjoy it.
Find all of our videos and sign up for our newsletter at artthisweek.com. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and Twitter.